Good afternoon, it's Robert. Delighted to be with you again. And today I want to speak about men, women, and godly relationships. And to take it from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. Let me read the passage to you. Wives, in the same way submit yourselves to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Now, there are a few subjects that can stir up such heat as the suggestion that wives submit to their husbands. And indeed, there have been many women's movements over the ages that have stressed equality rather than complementarity. And maybe there are some people here who are perhaps single or divorced or widowed, who feel that such passages are inappropriate for them personally. But these are principles that we can all learn from, whatever our marital state. Now, if I come to the beginning of this passage, it says, wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your husbands. In the same way. What's it referring to? Well, the previous passage is all about Christ's submission and obedience to his Father in terms of going to the cross. And so the pattern for wives is Jesus' own obedience and submission to his Father. The book of 1 Peter has many parallels with Paul's epistle to the Ephesians. And in that particular epistle, Paul parallels the relationship between a husband and wife as similar to that between Christ and his church. And so the relationship of Christ to his church is a model for husbands and wives, where Christ is the groom and the bride is the wife. Now, Christ's commitment was to love his bride sacrificially and give himself up for her, and to bring the best out of his bride so that she might be radiant. That's the word that's used in Ephesians. Not to oppress or diminish, but to do all that he can to bring out the potential of his bride. And the bride is to shelter under the headship or umbrella of her husband. Submission doesn't mean subservience or domination. And to this very day, some of the most powerful and effective ministries I see are the initiative of women. And the reality is, many, many times in a healthy relationship, a husband will need to submit to his wife. I certainly do. Now, in the church of Peter's time, there was a major concern, and it's mentioned in verse 2. There were too many unbelieving husbands. And it's often the case in our world. And anecdotally, in my experience as a vicar, I've seen far more marriages where the wife has been a believer and the husband not, rather than vice versa. Now, unbelieving husbands will never be won over by rebellious, self-important, hectoring wives. Peter's concern is that the wife must take a crucial role by her godly living to win over her husband. And for there to be healthy communities, the relationship between a husband and wife is foundational. If there are healthy marriages, then there will be a healthy church. And with a healthy church, there will be a healthier community. And Peter lists a number of qualities that a wife should aspire to. Let me read them to you. Submissiveness, purity, reverence, inner beauty, a gentle and quiet spirit, hope in God, doing what is right. But just in case you think that it's just for the wives, there's also some things that the husband should be concerned about. And he's told to be considerate, respectful, mindful that he's in a partnership in the sense of being co-heirs, and prayerful. Too often, a husband fails to take, in terms of the spiritual life of the family, a leading role. It's the dad, the father, who is to take that leading role in nurturing the spiritual life of his family. Husbands, we need to step up. Of course, there are times when things can go wrong, when the husband's and wife's relationship is not what it should be. And wives, you're never to submit to abuse, whether it's verbal, physical, sexual. And if you're told that you're no longer allowed to worship Jesus, then a higher principle of God applies. And you may need the wider body of Christ to support and help you in that. A higher principle is at stake. But let me finish on a positive note. The impact of a strong family life and healthy relationships within the church and within the community can be immense. And yes, it obviously concerns husbands and wives, but it applies to all of us, whether single, divorced, remarried, or whatever. How can you openly and honestly set to work before Jesus about repairing relationships that aren't all that they should be? See, when relationships are good and marriages are good and church life is good, then we can make a great impact for the kingdom. So let me invite you to think about your relationships today. How can you, before Jesus, seek to make them better? Where is Jesus wanting you to make changes? We're living in a changing world with this COVID-19 crisis. Jesus is calling the church to be different and to change. It means that in our relationships, we often have to change and be different too. What's God calling you to do today? Thank you for listening.